It's a great honor for us, for the Design Institute, to host such an amazing writer as a speaker for today, and hope you will enjoy what will happen. And let me give the floor to Veronica right now, I guess, to make an introduction.
Thank you so much. It's a great joy for the Dilemma Academy to be in Tbilisi and to start our program here in the Design Institute with tonight's lecture. And before we start, I just wanted to share a few words about the Dilemma Academy itself. For us, it's a very special moment coming actually back to Georgia, because the Dilemma Academy was established here 3 years ago in a small village called Ateni, where the group of writers, intellectuals, artists, activists met for the very special non-program conference, during which we were simply discussing our dreams and the biggest challenges in our work. And one desire that came out of that meeting was to create a new space, new platform for us to meet and to co-create, and that's how the Dilemma Mobile Academy was created between Central Europe, the Caucasus, and the Balkans. And since then, we keep traveling to different places, to Ukraine, to Armenia, to Poland, to Georgia, meeting and each time discussing the most important dilemmas in front of us. Apart from that, we also have residency programs, summer school, and different types of activities. But this format of a mobile academy, traveling and meeting, also immersing ourselves in different contexts, is still the core of our activities. And this time we come to Georgia with the dilemma of the responsibility of culture, feeling that this is the best place to discuss it and the best audiences to engage in this conversation. And tonight's lecture by Krzysztof Czyżewski is the inauguration of that dilemma session. So I'm very glad that you are joining us for it here, and I'm very grateful for the Design Institute for the hospitality. And now I'm giving the voice to Medea Metrevelli, who is the main organizer of this dilemma in Georgia.
Veronica, thank you so much. I would like to thank our guests who was interested to attend today evening. It's a very important event by Krzysztof Czyżewski, very good friend of Georgia, friend of Georgian artists, writers, intellectuals. He is a famous poet, a cultural animator, editor, philosopher, founder of Borderland Foundation, and we are honored to have him again in Tbilisi with this great discussion, lecture towards counterculture, new outlook for responsibility of culture. ყველას კიდევ ერთხელ ძალიან დიდი მადლობა მობრძანებისთვის, ძალიან დიდი მადლობა Design Institute-ს თანამშრომლობისთვის, არაჩვეულებრივ გუნდს და გისურვებთ საინტერესო და სასიამოვნო ღონისძიებას. Krzysztof, please.
Didi madloba for this invitation, and I'm so challenged to be again in Georgia and not to be borrow with ideas and things we should discuss. What I mean by that is that for me coming to Georgia always was and opening new horizons, that old questions, old patterns we already know doesn't sufficient to the situation in Georgia, and you could be very easily, all type of anachronic person when you will cope with something what is not innovative, not creative, not avant-garde in any form. And one more reflection on the Dilemma Academy. When we established it in Georgia, I mean people from Lithuania, Romania, Balkans, Croatia, Poland, Ukraine, we were thinking about the new situation we face in this time. I mean, all of our countries experience this openness to the West, and we had the time, which I would in short call just to adopt some patterns, some ideas, some solutions from the West into our ground. And we were all challenged and focused to spend our energy of new state buildings, new civic society buildings, sometimes mimicking, already existing ideas and patterns from the West. More and more now, today, we feel that it is insufficient, that we need some new ideas. And of course, saying that doesn't mean that we don't have lessons to learn still in Georgia, in Poland, about democracy, about just full society, and so on. Still, there is a lot of relevant to gain in our countries. But at the same time, we think and we know and we see what's going on in the West as well. And there's no the same situation like 10, 20, 30 years ago that we can say, look, there is another world. We can give as an example, as an answer or solution for some problems we face, that we can escape somewhere, that we can find freedom somewhere else. I can't show you any country today that I would advocate for replica, or for just easy example of a pattern. So dilemma was this initiative, thinking that, okay, maybe we are now responsible also as artists, as writers, as intellectuals, humanists, to create new ideas also, or to which we can put into the dialogue with our Western partners, but not only, all over the world, to talk about that the world is challenging us for creating new things and new ideas. And it was so like 5 years ago, Veronica? 3 years ago, yeah. But over these 3 years, look how the world changed. Yes, what happened in the United States, what happens in Middle East, and how the struggle Ukraine is fighting for is becoming relevant for all of us. How this war becomes our war, which was not so clear maybe for some of us from the beginning, but I believe that more and more of us understand that this is our war, very, very much. So saying that, that was a way I started to think about this Tbilisi lecture, how I call for myself that I should structure some new thoughts, some ideas I was thinking long ago, and now there is a time to express it and to put it in a format of a lecture I can share with you. And one of the things I mentioned in the title of this lecture is counterculture. And of course you are familiar with this term, and if I would think about my background as an artist and a cultural person, I would say counterculture was a very important source of inspiration for my life when I was a very young person in the 70s, the so-called counterculture in the United States, in the West, but also in Prague, in Hungary at that time, was a very important inspiration. Counterculture meant at that time that what we see as a status quo in culture is taken over by this middle-class white society, which tended to keep it as for granted, commercialize it, put it into the market space and put it into the ideologies dominated at that time. One of them was technocracy. That's how beatniks or people of counterculture in the 60s would call it, technocracy. Not only Vietnam War, which was also relevant at that time to oppose it, but technocracy overtaking our lives, also in culture, and the crisis of community that was feeling. So growing alienation, growing solitude of people in the modern world, and culture not giving answer to these desires, longing, and so on. So that was a time when we started to practice the way out of that system, of that systematic monopolized culture at that time. Yes, and we created some oppositional scenarios, like, for example, to create communes. And the direction and the gesture, counterculture gesture for that at that time was to go out of community, of society, of big cities, and so on. To go out to the wilderness, to solitude, to create the paradise. The image of dream of paradise was somehow imagined as being apart from so-called normal community or normal life. So it was a kind of escape, like following the ideas of David Thoreau and his Walden. As you remember, there was one of the cult books at that time of a man who started to live somewhere in the forest, and doing everything from the scratch and being self-sufficient, independent, ecological, empathic to the nature and everything. Unfortunately, we don't remember that David Thoreau wasn't staying involved until the end of his life. Yes, that after a few years he came back to society and created another very important book about the civic disobedience. And he became one of the leaders of the action in society, rather than living, like hippie in the communes. Yes, so we took the Walden as a pattern of escape and creating isolate, separate communities somewhere else, but we didn't connect it with civic engagement, yes, and civic disobedience and civic activism, as Thoreau did himself. And I think it is one of the mistakes and guilt of counterculture, that it ended up with this new kind of isolation. And probably all of us will agree that these communes, after years, became small regimes, yes, under strong position of guru and enslaving rather people, being part of that and giving them, offering them freedom. But the whole counterculture, and this is the main thing I want to pick up for our lecture today, in the core of counterculture was freedom. So it was a culture of freedom, culture heading towards freedom, and freedom was like a main goal to achieve and the main direction, which we can connect with liberalism, with liberal democracy, with liberal West, and with liberal human rights, and so on, and so on. And thinking, because my belief, since we established Borderland Foundation and Center, and since we are engaged in culture after 1989, after that transformation time, my strong belief is that we need a new counterculture, that we are again trapped by status quo of culture, which is in hands of market, of festivals, of events, and with very little impact, in fact, on what's going on in the world. So my problem I have, especially when we are going deeply in such dark time as today, is what about culture? Yes, why? We do, thousands, millions of festivals, of spendings to culture and events. And why the impact on our life to prevent new regimes, to prevent new authoritarianism, to prevent new fascism is so little. It's a kind of discrepancy between, pumping into the events in culture, which are growing, which are, bigger and bigger scale, and the little effect they have on our life, on the politics, on social justice, on tolerance, and so on and so on. So that's another background for my reflection today, to raise this question, okay, what about culture? Yes, where we are, and counterculture, today what it would mean. Yes, how we would define it, or have some inspirations or intuitives, because I don't have, of course, ready answers to that, but my reflection will be just to open one of the possible paths of reflection toward new understandings of the role of culture, responsibility of culture today. So I will not talk about all elements of that, all dimensions, but I will focus today on one thing, which is freedom, and try to struggle with the old pattern of freedom, how we understood it in the past, during also the time of counterculture of 60s and 70s, and what possibly is changing in our way of understanding freedom today. I will propose you a short philosophical meditation. Sorry for that. I will not tell much about practicalities. You know that I'm a practitioner of ideas, and mostly my focus in practice, in doing things. But sometimes I'm in the point that we should also work on ideas and changing our mindset, which is built and shaped by ideas, by philosophies, by abstract concept. And if we don't struggle also with these matters, we are sometimes defenseless in practices, in how we develop our practical work. So let me present you a short philosophical meditation on freedom. Today I title it, I call it "With Whom to Freedom?" A Tbilisi lecture on toward counterculture, a new outlook for the responsibility of culture. And I will start it with a phrase not easy for me to translate into English. In Polish we would say "z czym do ludzi," when sometimes you are faced with a challenge that overwhelms us. We ask, what are you coming to people with? Implicitly, we hear the ironic retort, what do you think you are? Look at yourself. What are you thinking? Get a grip. Look around you. Be realistic. Looking at it soberly, freedom is beyond us. The sources of force and forces that enslave humanity are countless, ranging from genes and randomness of birth to the inevitability of death. The same applies to collective existence. Inheriting the age-old desire to live in a free society, we can only, to a greater or lesser extent, limit the repressive apparatus of power and mutual dependencies. We yearn for freedom, incorrigible utopians, so we believe in the ideal of freedom and are aware that it is unattainable. We still strive toward it. We live by moving toward freedom. If we give up this pursuit, we die. Fighting in the name of freedom, we gain various footholds along the way. Being ourselves, unconditional love, free speech, individual independence, national sovereignty, civic engagement, spontaneous existence in the world, and finally, the ability to look death in the face without fear. When asked what brings us to freedom, we have a story of our achievements up our sleeves. We say with pride, finally, no one will decide for me how I should live or whom I should love. We have fought for independence. I have emancipated myself from patriarchy. There is no freedom without solidarity. That's a famous phrase in Poland, especially, when we were still under communist regime. The Pope John Paul II came to Poland and said this, there is no freedom without solidarity. Nie ma wolności bez solidarności. We took it as a direction. But what happened? So there was a time we needed solidarity for freedom. And when we gained the freedom, we lost solidarity. And that's, I think, not only the Poland case, but all over the world. We have problems living in more or less free societies, having problems with solidarity. And so there's another lesson we should gain, especially in countries like Georgia, Poland, or others, that for centuries we were mobilizing ourselves for fighting for freedom and using solidarity as an instrument for that, but didn't have time. History didn't offer us this space to learn how to be empathic and in solidarity with people when we gain the freedom. At the same time, we know that these gains are never final, not only because they are impermanent and require constant effort, but because the world is changing and we, along with it. Worse still, the colonizer, occupier, domestic abuser, or fascist may stand before us in a new guise and prove devilishly cunning in exploiting democracy, individualism, freedom of speech, love of a country, or the earth's natural resources for new forms of enslavement, disregarding international law or post-catastrophic moral obligations such as never again. The mocking, derisive question, with what to freedom, thrown back in our faces once again, compels us to seek new answers, realizing that a return to the old strongholds of freedom proves insufficient, if not impossible, for they have been not so much destroyed as taken over. So this is very much about what we spoke even today, that these anti-democratic powers learn very much how to use democracy to destroy it. In search of new names of freedom, I ask, with whom to freedom? I transform the inherent weakness of the colloquial phrase, with what to the people, which points to my undervaluation, inferiority, and subordination, into words of power, existential reflection, and high stakes, with freedom hanging in the balance. I effect this transformation by abandoning the words "with what," which refer to the baggage of my gains in freedom. In its place, I introduce "with whom," another being, a human, an animal, or some other existence, someone different from me, in the singular or plural. I invoke a presence that will not only strengthen me on the path to freedom, but will also broaden the very understanding of freedom itself. With whom to freedom? By asking this, I leave behind the possibility of striving alone, by myself, in the hope of achieving individual freedom. I do not deny its value. Perhaps I even fought for it. But it has left me with a sense of inadequacy, as well as wounds of self-enslavement that can only be healed by search for new names for freedom. So I go on, looking around ever more attentively for a companion. Philosophers of dialogue would say that I'm experiencing a transition from an era dominated by the first person singular, by the Cartesian I, the need for distinctiveness, independence, and self-determination, combined with the egocentrism and emancipation of Enlightenment reason, toward an era crowning humanity's development, in which the dominant will be the second person singular, you, and with it, coexistence, compassion, shared responsibility, interdependence, and empathy. By saying philosophers of dialogue, I mean, of course, philosophers like Martin Buber or Emmanuel Levinas, or for me also Simone Weil and Hannah Arendt. So there is the tradition behind it, which really believe that the future for us is this shift to the second person singular you. And of course, among them is also Albert Camus, whom I will quote here. In the heart of the darkness of 1943, Albert Camus notes, you as a means of restoring morality. You as a means of restoring morality. This is, in the notebooks Camus was writing all his lives, and I found it very fascinating. And there is another person I want to call to our attention, Josef Tischner. You're probably not familiar with his name. He was a priest, Catholic priest in Poland, but mainly philosopher. And he was a mentor for our solidarity movement. The solidarity movement, the workers' movement, had not only priest, who was celebrating services, in the Stocznia Gdańska, in Gdańsk, and so on. But he was mostly a philosopher, and he wrote this famous book, Ethos, Ethic of Solidarity, yes, Etyka Solidarności. And all these concepts are very close to the philosophers of dialogue. And so the anecdote about him is like that: a familiar cleric visits Father Josef Tischner, who, in nearing death, with a fundamental question that we often wish to ask sages at the end of their journey: how should one live? The question to Josef Tischner. In response, he heard, it doesn't matter how. What matters is with whom. When thinking about freedom, I introduce the conjunction with. And now I should make a small footnote. In Polish language, this conjunction is a letter z, which you can translate with in English. But z means also what we say in English for. So you can be the closer with you, but you can be also with other side, with something what is beyond the border, yes, in the other world. So it combines these two words. So unfortunately, in English, it will sound both with and for. So I introduce the conjunction with, known in linguistics as a preposition of accompaniment. With you all, with another, with stranger, with the soul, with God. In the Polish-Lithuanian borderland where I live, I still often hear people say, go with God. as a farewell. These words refer not so much to this or that religion, as to the belief that I should not be alone on the road, that there is someone else with me who watches over my wanderings and with whom I will not go astray, but will find my way. Setting out on a journey, opening one's horizon to unknown and ever-changing, is an act of freedom. This is accompanied by anxiety of getting lost and the fear of confronting the stranger. This state is expressed by another function of the conjunction with, for. In Polish, it is the same and one-letter conjunction that, which because of it is also called the preposition of distance. From this side, from beyond the threshold, from the opposite bank, from the other side of the wall, from beyond the border, from another world. By asking with whom to freedom, I invoke another presence so as not to astray, not perhaps even more so to heal the wound of estrangement, the disintegration of the whole, the shattering of unity, the wound of alienation. In this way, I enter the space of freedom, the struggle for it. Separation enslaves us. The strongest weapon of the dictatorial power that robs me of my freedom is the introduction of division. From the Greek, diabolos is the one who divides. Freedom is the restoration of unity and finding oneself in the whole, not going off on one's own and being on the outside or being master in one's own home. How much does freedom cost? A place for another as a shared table, not in the side tables. In the after-mentioned 1943 notebook, Camus jots down thoughts related to the novel The Plague, which he was working on at the time. One of the most important books of 20th century, which would once again be recognized as prophetic a few years ago during the pandemic. For Camus, the plague is a metaphor for the disease of modern civilization. What is this disease? We read in his notebook, in the chapter on isolation camps, relatives are already separated from the deceased. Then, for sanitary reasons, children are separated from parents and men from women. Thus, writes Camus, separation becomes universal. Everyone is condemned to loneliness. In this way, separation becomes the novel's central theme. That's Camus. Elsewhere, we read in that notebook, very important, writes Camus, you didn't even rebel because they fed you and separate you from one another. The plague emphasizes separation, but being together is merely a prolonged exception. The plague is the rule. That's Camus. Camus' reflection on separation as a source of modern enslavement correspond with the ideas of Erich Fromm, author of Escape from Freedom. For him too, the quintessence of enslavement is fascism, born of a sense of individuals' powerlessness and insignificance. The source of this condition is the isolation of the individual. When we examine the aspect of modern man's freedom, writes Fromm, we pointed to the economic conditions that lead to the increasing isolation and powerlessness of individual in our age. By discussing the psychological effects of these, we demonstrated that powerlessness leads either to a kind of escape, typical for authoritarian character, or to the sort of forced conformism, in which the isolated individual becomes an automaton, loses their self, even though they consciously consider themselves a free being and subject only to themselves. That's Erich Fromm. The question for me is how to overcome this separation and the associated isolation of the individual. Or, to put in another way, referring to Fromm's thought, how to move from negative freedom, freedom from something, to positive one, freedom to. Fromm, already foreshadowing the advent of the counterculture, writes about the complete and uncompromising realization of one's self, in the hope that then the fundamental cause of man's antisocial impulses will disappear. Today, I approach Fromm's words with great reserve, remembering how unconstructive the counterculture rebellion turned out to be, often transforming into the isolationism of closed and over time increasingly violent communes, and consequently proving to be yet another, perhaps only better disguised, form of escape from freedom. That is why I ask the question, with whom? Toward freedom. I do not believe, however, that this should be the opposite pole to self-realization of the I, complete and uncompromising, as Fromm is writing. Perhaps the presence of you, complete and uncompromising, is the only chance for our self-realization, for our being ourselves. There is something deeply liberating in the decision to walk toward freedom with someone. Exactly, it is my decision. There is no determinism in this, neither biological nor rational, no directive imposed from above, nor a close cultural pattern. Following someone remains entirely in my hands. It is a free choice and an inner opening to hospitality, to sharing freedom. How much does freedom cost? Giving up one's share for the sake of a shared value. This means that while I have my share, I still have nothing. I'm not yet free. Only by relinquishing what is exclusively mine, including my own freedom, and sharing it with others, do I have a chance to be free. Walking with a companion has other transformative consequences for our understanding of freedom. This applies, for example, to the introduction of hospitality into the horizon of freedom, and with it the specific quality of unconditionality, by asking what I will get out of it, or by imposing demands and restriction on it, I undermine the very essence of hospitality. The same applies to freedom. It cannot be traded or subject to conditions. And if that is the case, then we can say that only a truly free person can build a hospitable home. Let me make one more reflection on that. It is about Polish-Ukrainian relationship during this war. When it started in full scale in 2022, Polish society appeared to be very hospitable to refugees from Ukraine, and we hosted millions without having, a special camps, refugee camps, or any kind of this policy. It was under the burden of civic society, just people, not the government. And there was no question at that time what would be my benefit out of that. Yeah, we just did it because we were human. And there was no political voice, in this narrative. But after time passes, you have politicians, sometimes at the very beginning with good intentions, trying to prove what our national budget will have from these refugees. How we can benefit, because without answering these questions, we don't believe that it is worthwhile to do it, yes? And when only we shift from that just pure hospitality to the interest-based, narrative, we lost everything. And we are now more and more in hands of politicians who have interest in, destroying Polish-Ukrainian relationships. And sometimes, why I'm saying that because they use this argument, but it will be more pragmatic. Let's be pragmatic. Don't be idealistic. Because what I'm saying now about unconditional hospitality, it could sound like idealistic, yes? But in fact, it is only pragmatic way to solve big problems. Yes, at that time, we really solved problems in practice. When politicians came with this way of interest, of benefits, of conditions, we lost any pragmatic solutions for the problems. Yes, there is a big mass, there is a big growing, right-wing, xenophobic feelings and so on. So nothing constructive comes out of that. Yeah. So very often in these terms we are charged to be idealistic, just having trust in full values of hospitality, but in fact, the idealists or unpragmatical people are on this other side because they don't have, not offering any concrete solutions to that. So we may ask again, what is the price of freedom? An open door to visitors with no preconditions, regardless of skin color, nationality, religion, gender, social status, or other vagaries of fate. We might say that this is an excessive openness posing a threat to our security and our values. But a wall will not diffuse the threat. It will not make otherness more familiar. It will only push it aside until it turns into a conflict that is destructive for both sides. Walking with someone toward freedom, I have time to talk, get to know one another, and undergo an inner transformation. Each participant of this journey, upon reaching its end, will already be a different person. Metanoia shows that true freedom begins where the illusion that we are already free ends. How much does freedom cost? Constantly pushing beyond oneself, without a lifetime job, without permanent residency, and without return policy. And finalizing my reflection, I would ask again, with whom to freedom? With a different self, one attuned to the other and jointly responsible for one's neighbor. Making room and finding oneself in the rebirth of unity, discovering the other as part of oneself, as inner voice going against the tide of one's own reason, and self-image, with a self free enough to be hospitable. How much does freedom cost? Making oneself a subject of the earth, not in service of the self, but along with all living beings in service of the common. Thank you for your attention. And I think we have some time for your reflections, your questions.
I would like to thank Krzysztof for a very interesting lecture, and thank you for sharing your ideas with us. And if you have questions, so we can use this opportunity to ask questions or share your ideas or positions regarding issues that Krzysztof opened today. Thank you.
I have to admit that I don't know much about the what was the text and what was the message of John Paul II's text. There will be no freedom without solidarity. Mm-hmm. Was solidarity named after this phrase, or?
No, it was already after the movement was established. So, but it was really provoking for our authorities, in Poland at the time. I think it was 1983 or 4. Yes, during martial law, when he combined freedom with solidarity. And in fact, it was at the end of this narrative of using solidarity for freedom, yes, as an instrument, for gaining it. So the freedom was the main goal, and absolute, and the definitive. And only after 1989 we learned that being free we can lose solidarity, and that's another story. The question for us, cultural practitioners, at the very beginning of this transformation was, could we create culture of solidarity after that, facing these new problems and challenges? So coming to the borderlands for us, less important was the question how I could freely express my feelings and creativeness as an artist and as a cultural person, rather than how I can serve with this work to the others, to build solidarity among the people and so on. So it is challenging you to create new workshop of culture, yes, that we should think about very much. So still today I believe that we are challenged to create culture of solidarity also. Yeah, and maybe this is a way to regain, in a new terms, freedom. Yeah.
Krzysztof, I have one question. You mentioned that responsibility of culture is very, very important, especially in dictatorships. So what you will suggest or share your ideas regarding other societies' experiences, because nowadays our country and representatives of different artistic groups are challenging some problems and some difficulties, yeah? And it will be very, very important for us to hear your ideas regarding this issue, maybe not Polish, but maybe some experiences for other countries about this topic. And as for solidarity, I just would like to mention that there are my friends, colleagues, poets, Georgian poets and writers, and taking into account that Zuia Dratiani, Georgian poet, is imprisoned, he is in jail, really showed very big very huge solidarity, yeah, and they are in boycott with state institutions and different state organizations due to this fact that great Georgian poet and translator is in jail. So thank you.
From one side, of course, we all understand, and you are the example of that, of being active and courageous enough to speak out about human rights, about the violation of freedom of speech, of society. And of course, this is very important, the responsibility of cultural people. But there is something else which we should understand, we can answer to. For example, we may feel that there is a gap between so-called normal people or provinces and capital and elite people, yes? That when we look at elections and the voters, we see that many voters supporting authoritarian or anti-democratic parties and political movements. They are coming not from big capital cosmopolitan elite, yes, but from other parts of our society. And the question for us, are we responsible for that as culture people? Can we do something on that field? Or not? Yes. So this is another field could be open with that, and it demands from us also very much a critical attitude, also how culture works. Yes, and why it is omitting very often, the larger groups of people, and not building this kind of solidarity in wider terms. And the third answer I would have to that is. And this is very much for me responsibility that we care about the craft, because from one side we have something what you can see like democratization of culture, so that everything is important, every voice is important. I was recently, a few days ago, in jury of a competition for an exhibition of literary house in Poland, in Gdańsk, and the concept how to present the literature for the people, for the audience, was very democratic. That we should not focus only on big names or on fame, but also, to pop culture, to different aims of literature in our society. And this is a very positive attitude, yes, from one side. But at the same time, there is no critical reflection, about the good level of writing. Yes, because we are writers, you should care about artistry, about the taste, about the ambitions we can connect with literature, not to step down because we want to be with the people, but still care about the aesthetics, about the mastery of this work. And it doesn't mean that it is that in that way we exclude anybody, yes? So that's very much about our concept of small center of the world, that you are working with people, with community, making it central for them, but it means also that you are not compromising with your artistic, intellectual ambitions and quality and courageousness, because this is a very, very strong tendency in culture. Just forgive about that. Yes, it doesn't matter. In fact, because the question about the responsibility is very much connected to the trust. Yes, how we can build a trust with people. So that's the fundament of being responsible in practice. And we may tend to think that building a trust is just to be familiar with people, easy, it's all easy. But then they do not respect you in long term. Yeah? They start to respect you if you are challenging them, if you are truthful to yourself, to your aesthetic taste and everything. That's what they need from us. So that would be another level of this answer.
Krzysztof, thank you again. My question is solidarity possible only in times of crisis?
That, you see, that how it works before. Yes, that when we are in a critical situation of fighting for major things of our countries, societies, or persons, we think about solidarity to engage people, to help it, yes, to solve it. When I'm thinking about solidarity after gaining freedom, after the situation when we are more or less, free, I'm saying about something else, which is not connected to critical crisis situation, but daily organic work, which builds the fundament and prevent the risk of violating freedom in the future. So this is this cultivation, kind of cultivare ground of culture, which we lost, I think, in contemporary culture. This festivity, this event-oriented culture prevents us to think about cultivation. And we replace the święto, the holiday with festival. And the reason for that is that, and the difference for me between holiday and festival is, of course, I know festivals who could be like holidays, and there are very good examples of good festivals. But in general, the holiday is that you work all the year long, yes, and you are cultivating certain kind of work and engagement, and at the end of this, you have a holiday, like an outcome of that. Yes, that you gain some, and you are somehow creating, all this with your powers, with your engagements, community, and so on. The problem with festival is that you can buy it. Yes, you have money, you invite, and you have presentation, and you enjoy it. And when there is this disconnection between your work, your daily life, and something what is like a culmination of a spiritual catharsis or an important event, when it is disconnected and somebody just giving it you, there is no way to clay community, to build this real solidarity, which we are talking now about, yes. So that's another kind of solidarity which doesn't need critical crisis period of time to make it possible. Mm-hmm.
First of all, thank you it's working? Yeah. Thank you very much for your extremely interesting concepts and perspectives. I come from education, so maybe I'm bringing different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And we have very deep debates among educators if freedom and solidarity and if empathy is teachable. Mm-hmm. And your comment, your question about responsibility provoked me to ask this question. How do you see potential of solidarity from your perspective? Is it teachable, especially when this technology or technocratic world is eating everybody, and we don't want to capsulate solidarity or culture, this potential of having this for everybody. Is it possible? What do you think?
I don't have easy answer to your question,
I
because, but thank you very much for that, because sometimes it happens spontaneously. As the example I was sharing with you with Polish-Ukrainian relationship, at the beginning it was very spontaneous. Yes, so there was no this reflection. You see the danger, the people in need, and you just do it. Yeah, and I remember the Pope Francis, when he became a pope, so it was the best period of his time, and it was this refugee problem with over Mediterranean. Yes, and as you may remember, the first thing he did, becoming a pope, he went to Lampedusa island to welcome refugees and saying that Europe could be the home for them. But being asked what is the role of religion, of a church, at that time, his answer was that the church should be like a szpital polowy, field hospital. Yes, there is a war, you are a medicine person, you establish shelter and hospital, and you don't ask whom you invite and help and everything, because it is just a human need. So there is this level of solidarity, of course, but it is insufficient. We can't say that it will work like that, and we are not obliged to develop education and cultural work about that. And by the way, I'm very grateful that you bring education to our discussion, because for me, there is no division between culture and education. That when I mean culture, it's including education and right. And my master, my mentor Czesław Miłosz, once was asked, "What you would do if you become a minister of culture?" And his answer was, I will introduce Greek language to the schools. But Mr. Czesław, it is education, not Minister of Culture, not education. Is it separated? He said. So for him, it was very strange to have different ministries, between culture and education. But we all, culture people, understand how education should be part of that. And when we are saying cultivare, we think about being very much engaged in education, of course. Yeah.
Krzysztof, thank you very much for these reflections, and they brought a lot of waves of my own reflections and a lot of space to think. My reaction, which also includes a question, is this: it's when you were talking about the need to build this new thinking that underlies solidarity, this new ethics of being in the world, being together. I caught myself on this anxiety or maybe question of a very strong invisible barrier that we have in the form of our digitalization, which we cannot fight because it's our environment, it's our reality, right? We live in it, but we kind of, I would like to hear your thoughts, if you have any, about this. What I mean is that we are so, it has become so habitual and easy to just click and experience this as a form of solidarity. Like you just click, like you see like something related to the war or resilience of a nation and stuff, and you just click like or love and you experience this as a support. As being with them, which is not true, right? So I hope to hear from you, like what we can do to use this digital, digital living to do something more than clicking, because we cannot avoid this. Thank you.
Answering that, I would ask, for example, Ivanka, who is our member of Dilemma.academy. She came from Kharkiv, and it took her 50 hours to join us. Yes, for the not online meeting, but a personal one. Why is she doing so? Ivanka is here. Yes, yes. So.
Why I am getting on this way to come here, to be loved and hugged. Okay, let's try the more wise answer maybe later, but today let's talk and be loved and hugged.
But I think what she's saying is a deep need of many people living together today. So that would be my hope, to this problem you raise. Yes, because on one hand it could be helpful, yes, in different ways, all the technologies we are surrounded by, but we couldn't replace the hug, the intimate interhuman meetings with virtual space, yes, and so that's also a challenge for us. Let's do it as much as possible and from as early age as possible, because always I'm hearing that the kids like it. The kids like these facilities. But did anybody offer them alternative? Yes, that we from the very beginning start to believe that that's a world. Yes, that's how the world is going. That they will like, but it's always about offering alternatives. Yes, and engaging them in different way from the very, very beginning, and they can then have both. Yes, at least, because it's not about isolating them from modernity, of course, but offering alternatives which are not based on virtual space only, and technology as much as possible. Mm-hmm.
If there are any questions, Nina?
First of all, thank you very much. It's a very big pleasure for us to have you here. So coming from cultural education, my question is that to feel solidarity, you need to be part of something, you need to belong, right? So let's be honest, like post-Soviet country never created culture where people belong. and they feel loved or safe. And from other hand, we never had an educational system where people feel belonging and love. So now we are thinking ahead, what will be the next? So I'm thinking about with all our friends here. So we're thinking how to make sure that education and future cultural education and also culture itself will be more inclusive in real term of inclusiveness, more lovable, more grounded maybe, because it was always elite, you know? Coming from the cultural background, we all feel that it's little exclusive and we all liked it. Now we all feel it's like not only Georgians, but all of us. We all feel that it's very dangerous. It's very exclusive in a bad way. So maybe you have better scenarios than us, because it's very hard for us to think positively now, but I believe there are ways you already explored, and maybe Georgia will be the next one. So I'm talking about education in a proper way, cultural education, and then culture will be the result of everything, right? So I believe you have answers for my questions.
I have this in general, because there are many details we can talk about, and they are important, but I see, and I think we will raise this topic in next days, that there is no culture on the agenda of liberal parties and democracies. That's a kind of general problem. Why my generation, which came from underground, I was working with together, you know, we publish culture magazine in our underground and so on. Why it happens that when they go to the politics, and their background very often is humanistic, you know, when they go to the politics, when they go to the government, the Minister of Culture is on the last place on the list of importance. Yeah, when a right-wing party comes to the power, Minister of Culture and Education is on the highest position. So something is in our liberal mindset that we don't understand the power of soft power. Yes, and we are very defenseless against all these very radical narratives which are dominating media spheres and so on. So there is one thing I think we should struggle for, yes, and maybe partly, I'm saying that partly the guilt is on our side. That maybe part of this guilt is that we wanted to be elitist, you know, and other issues, and still in mind of the people, the culture is something additional, you know, to the most important problems, yes? That maybe we do not offer enough alternatives and propositions how culture can be involved in changing or solving some major problems, yes, about that. From other side, when I speak, I was last week in Ukraine, when I speak with our Ukrainian partners, they understand that Ruski Mir, it is not very much about tanks, but mostly about culture, yeah? But you will hardly find somebody in the West understanding it. Yes, and so that's, I think, part of the problem and challenge for us, and changing in the way you were saying about culture, making it more inclusive, you know, and so that's a way also that we can gain interest from the politicians and these kind of powers as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dear Krzysztof, thank you so much for very, very interesting lecture and questions and answers. I would like to thank our great audience who inspired you with sharing your experiences as well. And I just would like to remind you that in the frames of Dilemma, we have other very interesting events. Tomorrow, Design Institute will also host film screening, documentary film screening by Nino Orjonikidze and Vanu Arsenishvili, Tunnel, and after film screening we will have panel discussion moderated by Anadzia Pshiba, also filmmaker, with film directors. Day after tomorrow we have a very interesting lecture in Ilia State University by the professor of Toronto University, Marcy Shore, about Václav Havel and his works and ideas. Day after tomorrow we also have a very interesting panel in Ligamus about culture in Caucasus, Balkan countries, and in Central Europe. And on Friday, on 8th of May, we have Café Europa in very interesting social space EZO, and great poets from Ukraine, Romania, Armenia, Georgia, Croatia, Poland will present their works. And during the event, Lexo Ratiani, the son of Zviad Ratiani, will perform for us. So we are looking forward to meet you during these events as well. And thank you so much, Design Institute, and all of you for great evening.